I am recording now. Yes, I'm recording. Hello. Welcome back. Welcome back to the and other people. Oh shit, let me do something real quick. I guess my door wasn't all the way closed. That would have been bad. Or embarrassing, I mean. Okay, so we left off. It's kind of fuzzy for me too, but we left off where sorry. We left off. Fucking Kyoshi went into the Avatar state with that duel with what's his face? Damn, what was his name? With Zhu, and she fucking killed him. Just donezo. Though I don't believe that yet, but she believes it in her inner monologue. So, for right now, Zhu is dead, as far as we know. Oh shit. Yeah, Zhu is dead. Hold on. Yeah. And she killed him, and then what else happens? Oh boy. Oh yeah, Jianzu got met up with his fellow sages, and they're just like, we deem you unfit. Bullshit. And I guess all of the sages, including Jianzu, were poisoned somehow. I don't know. And then oh yeah, Kyoshi was badly hurt, so she was you know, recovering and stuff, and then they got ambushed, and LoK is dead. That's sad and tragic. I didn't think they'd kill my boy, but I guess they did. Hold on. Yeah, and I guess they did. And then, in the process, someone kidnapped Rangi. And they're just like, come at me, Kyoshi, meet me here alone. They're probably the ones who have Rangi. Alright. This is the last... Uh, 28? 27, 28 pages. So yeah, it is exciting. Okay, I'll read now because it's, yeah. Also, I'm gonna get the new book tomorrow. I'm so excited because I get to start reading that after this book. And I didn't have to wait a year like all you guys. Or the ones that just read the book when it came out. Okay. Oh. Sorry. Okay. So, this chapter, this is the second to last chapter. It is called The Return. The Return. Jianzu sat by Heiren's bedside in the infirmary. She was alive, but she hadn't woken up yet. If he were ever to tell his story in the future, to document his journeys and his secrets, this part would stand out as the hardest road he'd traveled yet. Murdering Hui and the other sages in his own home was nothing. Drinking the poison himself to blunt suspicion, trusting in the training that the departed Master Amok had put him through, as well as Yoon, was nothing. Fuck, dude. Oh my god. Sneaky bastard. Wow. Let me just read that again, because that is diabolically smart. And how did he have time to... Did it seem like he had time to go ahead and, like, poison the people? Or maybe he did. But Jesus, man. He killed all of them. Oh, yeah, that's right. He was... Well, yeah. There we go. That's it. Yeah, if you were to tell his story in the future, to document his journeys and his secrets, this part would stand out as the hardest road he'd traveled yet. Murdering Hui and the other sages in his own home was nothing. Drinking the poison himself to blunt suspicion, trusting in the training that the departed Master Amok had put him through, as well as Yoon, was nothing. A good number of servants were dead as well. The ones who'd used the leftover boiled water he dosed for their own cups. Shit, dude. That's evil. Nothing. All nothing compared to seeing his last friend in the world laid low. This sacrifice had been the hardest. There would be aftershocks, ones that altered the landscape of the Earth Kingdom. The West Coast had been decimated by its leadership, especially by the Moseshi. No, it said in the very beginning that she was alive, but she hadn't woken up yet. Yeah, the first two sentences of this thing. Yeah, yeah, the first two sentences were Jianzu sat by Heiren's bedside in the infirmary. She was alive, but she hadn't woken up yet. But she was poisoned too. God damn. Oh, yeah. Like, he's nuts. He is crazy. So crazy. Yeah, it is. It's insane. Yeah. There would be aftershocks, ones that altered the landscape of the Earth Kingdom. The western coast had been decimated by its no, the western coast had been decimated of its leadership, especially by the especially by the the Moses Sea. Uh, certainly some of the sages who drank who certainly some of the sages who'd drank his poisoned tea were corrupt or incompetent. But many others were as invested in bringing strength and prosperity to the nation as he was. It would take time for the effects to be felt by the common populace, but the parts of the country farthest from Ba Sing Se had without a doubt been greatly weakened. There would be an outcry from the capital, investigations, accusations, but Hui had inadvertently laid the foundation for Jianzu to come out of this mess clean. He'd identified and rounded up the sages who were not fully on Jianzu's side, including some that were a complete including some that were a complete surprise. Had that been the whole had that been the whole point, yeah, yeah, he'd identified and rounded up the sages who were not fully on Jianzu's side, including some that were a complete surprise. Yeah, including some that were a complete surprise. That had been the whole point of telling Hui he'd lost the Avatar in the first place. If Hui had felt the remaining sages and the other half of the kingdom were out of his reach for this gathering, even with the damning evidence of the Avatar running with Dao Fei, that meant those particular officials were truly loyal to Jianzu. When the time came to reveal the true Avatar, he would be in a better, more secure position, having tested their limits. Hold on, let me reread this because, like, it's a lot of political stuff that I'm just like, okay, I kind of get what's going on, but I need to. I don't really understand his play right now, like what it's telling me, so I need to reread it. Yeah, right. Let me just read that last paragraph again. I think that's the one that doesn't make any sense to me yet. Yeah, if Hui had felt the remaining sages in the other half of the kingdom were out of his reach for this gathering, even with the damning evidence of the Avatar running with the Dalfei. That meant those particular officials were truly loyal to Jianzu. When the time came to reveal the true Avatar, he would be in a better, more secure position, having tested their limits. Okay, there we go. I get it now. The Chamberlain had done exactly what Jianzu had wanted him to do, only too fast and too aggressively. That miscalculation had forced him to turn his own home into a charnel house. It had cost him Hayran. He would dig up Hui's bones and feed them to the bull pigs for it. He got up, his knees still a little shaky from the lingering effects of the poison, and brushed a little strand of hair out of Hayran's sleeping face. Her constitution, her inner fire, had saved her life, but only just. Once he had the time, he'd devote every resource he possessed to healing her fully. Though, if she'd been awake for the past day or two, she certainly would have killed him for what he'd done to her daughter. He'd revisit the matter later. Right now, he had an important meeting to prepare for. They buried Lek in a field outside Zegon's cemetery instead of claiming one of the unused plots within its borders. He wouldn't have wanted to rest too close to abiders, Kramed explained. The grid of headstones off to the side resembled an orchard, each gray, fruitless tree carved, with the name and date of its owner. Kyoshi counted off the rows, burning them into her memory the approximate distance so she could come back to the spot in the future. Following the Si Wang tradition, they eschewed any markers, taking care to cut the sod of strips that could be replaced and patted back down. The desert folk considered considered the simple embrace of the land the only honor worthy of the departed. Silence was the most fitting eulogy. Standing there over Lek's invisible grave, Kyoshi couldn't have spoken about him anyway. She had the tongue of an animal in her mouth, the howl of a beast in her chest. Lao Gu was right about mercy having its price. She'd shown Jianzu mercy with every thought that went through her mind not dedicated to his destruction. Each smile and moment of laughter she'd shared with her friends had been some act of dereliction. Dereliction? Hold on. Dereliction? Jesus. Dereliction. Oh, okay, cool. I said it right. Yeah. Each smile and moment of laughter she'd shared with her friends had been an act of dereliction. This was the cost of forgetting Jianzu, of not whispering his name before every meal, not seeing his shape in every shadow, and sorry. Yeah, not seeing his shape in every shadow. That line right there tells me a little bit of foreshadowing for the next book, because the next book is called The Shadow of Kyoshi, and I wonder if that has something to do with Jianzu, which means maybe Jianzu doesn't die in this book. and he's back in the second book. But I'm only like assuming. Yeah. This was the cost of forgetting Jianzu, of not whispering his name before every meal, not seeing his shape in every shadow. And Kyoshi would never stop paying for it until she confronted him. What are you gonna do? Kyoshi glanced up from the patch of grass that cloaked her sworn brother. Karima had asked the question, her eyes red and hard. Wang and Lagu waited for an answer as well. I'm going to finish this, Kyoshi said, her voice the breaking of branches and rending of cloth. I'm going to finish him. What about us? Wang said. He had the same hunched, plaintive look as when he was waiting to hear whether or not the Avatar would stay with the group after their escape to Hujiang. Hold on, let me drink some water. Yeah, he had the same hunched, plaintive look as when he was waiting to hear whether or not the Avatar would stay with the group after their escape from Hujiang. Kyoshi, hold on. There's something in my throat. Okay, I think it's better. Kyoshi had to give him a different answer this time. She held up her hand. Here is where we have to part ways, she said. Qinchao Village had an air to it that many visitors found off-putting. Over half the inhabitants belonged to the clan of Qin. Wait. Yeah, I don't think in this book, but I don't know. Okay, I'm like looking through the pages, but no, I'm not gonna spoil it for me. I'm not gonna spoil it for you. I'm not. Nope. I don't think this is where she defeats Chin the Conqueror. But that would. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be in the next book. Yeah, if it's not in the next book, then fucking goddamn it. But, yeah. Oh. Setting up for the third book. I hope not. I hope they're done by the second, because I don't want to wait another year or however long it's gonna take. Okay. Over half the inhabitants belonged to the clan of Qin, making outsiders feel like they were talking to the same person and being watched by the same set of eyes, no matter what part of town they did business in. There was a degree of tight-fisted wealth that drew attention away from a set of bizarre customs and holidays that appeared nowhere else in the Earth Kingdom, many of which revolved around dolls and effigies, small ones for the home and great towering towering. I cannot say this word for whatever reason. Towering. I don't know. It just sounds funny to me. Okay. Small ones for the home and great towering ones in the square for public festivals. Qingqiao folk were insular compared to Yokians. They exalted their status with borderline treasonous statements like, a citizen of Qingqiao and a subject of the Earth Kingdom, where wordplay and order implied their priorities. A long time ago, Kyoshi and a group of other young maids had been allowed a few days of chaperone leave to visit Qingqiao. Yeah, a long time ago, Kyoshi and a group of other young maids had been allowed a few days of chaperone leave to visit Qingqiao. Jianzu had sternly warned them not to run afoul with the law there, lest bad things happen before he could rescue them. The other maids giggled and proceeded to ditch Kyoshi with Auntie Mui as they ran as a group from street to street, trying to whine for the first time and flirting with actors by the outdoor theater. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. They'd all come home safely. But Kyoshi remembered the sense of foreboding she'd had back then as she entered the gates through the circular walls and made their way to the teardrop-shaped town center. There had been a darkness below. There had been a darkness below the clean-swept streets and ghostly hues. There had been a darkness below the clean-swept streets and ghostly hues of the village that she'd sense would burn through the surface someday. She must have been looking into the future. That day was today, and that shadow was the deep, and the shadow from the deep was her. She walked down the main street, unconcerned by the stare she drew. With her headdress adding to her height, her makeup done in a fresh coat of red and white, and the heavy armored bracers strapped over her wrists, she looked half a performer who'd lost her troupe, and half a soldier without her battalion. She attracted attention, openly and without hesitation, like she'd never done before in her life. This was who she was now. This was her skin. This was her face. The Chin clan's crown jewel was the great stone tea house in the center of town, unlike the ramshackle Madame Kiji's with overnight rooms above a common area. The unnamed establishment was a 3-story structure devoted entirely to food and drink. In the manner of larger cities like Amashu and Ba Sing Se. Residents of the village would spend all morning there, enjoying tea and gossip. It was the most obvious place for Jianzu, or for her, to wait for the other. Kyoshi lowered her head and stepped inside. The restaurant was built with the second and third floors as mezzanines, letting her see the tables filled with boisterous conversation raining down from above. Waiters carried trays of stacked bamboo steamers through the aisles, calling out their contents, pausing when beckoned by a guest to place small dishes of glistening dumplings on the tables. The man behind the counter gaped at her and waved toward the dining area. Either it was open seating, or he was too taken aback to deny her entrance. She spotted a table on the ground floor that was still being cleared and moved toward it. Chairs squeaked against the floor as people turned in their seats. A server coming back the other way down the aisle dropped his tray and backpedaled as fast as he could. Kyoshi took a position facing the door so she could see who came and went. The dirty dishes in front of her vanished as if she were a shrine spirit who'd be displeased with any used-up offerings that lingered too long. Once the table was clean, she placed a round, smooth stone in front of her. Then she waited. Eventually, her stillness allowed the other patrons to go back to their business. The chatter around her picked up. The music of songbirds could be heard from the second floor. A gathering of elderly men had brought ornamented cages to show off new specimens in their collections to each other. Customers filed in through the entrance over the course of the morning. She took note of their builds, gaits, and faces, waiting for one of them to be Jianzu. It was only a matter of time before he came. Her former employer walked in and immediately spotted her sitting at the far table. He seemed slightly stooped. His handsome face was wan. His handsome face was wan, haggard, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. His hair and beard had been combed, but not in his usual impeccable standards. He looked older than she remembered. Much older. Jianzu settled into the chair across from Kyoshi. An enterprising waiter, seeing that a normal person had joined her at the table, came over to ask them what they wanted. Jianzu set him packing with a glare. The two of them drank each other in. You look terrible. You look terrible, Kyoshi said. So do you, he replied. Their shushu poison hasn't left your system completely. I can tell from the way you're a little slow blinking. He put his elbows on the table and leaned his hands, giving her an exhausted half smile. Did you ever realize the animals weren't tracking you personally to begin with? He said. I gave them Rangi's scent, not yours. You were hunting her the whole time instead of me? Let me say that again. You were hunting her the whole time instead of me? Kyoshi murmured. Her ruthlessness was beyond her comprehension by leaps and bounds. Jianzu rubbed his face. Bringing you back without some kind of leverage would have been pointless. You never would have listened to me. You made that perfectly clear before you ran away. I should have seen this coming, Kyoshi said. You traffic in hostages. You're no better than a Dao Fei. Jianzu frowned at her. The fact that you think so means you need proper training and education more than anything. It's time to stop this nonsense, Kyoshi. Come home. Where's Rangi? She's at home, Jianzu yelled. Where you should have been this entire time. His outburst didn't draw much attention from their nearest neighbors. Father was obviously incensed at daughter for dressing up and running away. Nothing they hadn't seen 100 times before. Kyoshi doubted very much that Rangi was strolling the gardens of the mansions at her leisure, waiting for her. Jianzu had grievously dishonored the firebender by shearing her hair. To avoid retribution, he would have to imprison Rangi, or worse. Kyoshi fought back against the anger that ran through her body. In a hostage situation, she needed to remain as calm as she could, but her knees shook a little, contacting the table, causing the stone to wobble. The rattling noise it made caught Jianzu's attention. He looked at the round rock. What is this? He said. Another child's toy you picked up while we were... Another child's toy you picked up while you were gone? Kyoshi shook her head. It belonged to someone who should take part in bringing you down. We're wasting times here with your games, Jianzu snapped. Hold on. Yeah, we're wasting time here with your games, Jianzu snapped. What are you going to do if not what I say? She couldn't speak her revenge out loud. Now that she was close enough to reach out and place her hands on Jianzu's neck, telling him to his face that she sought his death. That she shot. God, I cannot read today. Now that she was close enough to reach out and place her hands on Jianzu's neck, telling him to his face that she sought his death would have been a reverse incantation that slapped her will. Yeah, telling him to his face that she sought his death. She sought or thought? I guess it could be both. Thought sounds much better, though. Telling him to his face that she thought his death would have been the reverse incantation that sapped her will. I think thought is better, but it says sought. So maybe that works out too? I don't know. For me, it just doesn't feel right. Okay, but anyway. Yeah, telling him to his face that she sought his death would have been a reverse incantation that sapped her will. She was afraid that if she gave voice to her hatred, it would turn to dust like medicine that had sat unused for too long. See? Jianzu said at her silence. You came here without a plan. Whereas I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to do if you don't stand up, walk out of here, and follow me home. He brought his face closer. I'm going to collapse this building and kill everyone in it. Kyoshi's eyes widened. Her mind skipped over debating whether he would and focused on how he might. She knew he wasn't bluffing. That's the trouble with these structures made completely of stone, Jianzu said. They break instead of flexing, which makes them horribly vulnerable to earthquakes. Kyoshi glanced around them. The restaurant was packed with oblivious townsfolk, sitting on floors of stone, their backs to walls of stone, a roof of slate over their heads. In the hands of Jianzu, it was a death trap, a mass grave in the waiting. The threat was as real as could be. You'd be living up to your Dao Fei name, Kyoshi said. Jianzu froze. Kyoshi thought perhaps she'd insulted him to the point where he'd forgotten he. Kyoshi thought perhaps she had insulted him to the point where he'd forget he needed the Avatar, that he'd reach across the table and simply end her life. But he clapped his palm over his mouth and started to shake. Tears flowed out of his eyes. It took Kyoshi a while to understand he was laughing hysterically. She had never seen his true laugh before, and it was a quiet, spasmodic attack that claimed his whole body. She flinched as he pounded his fist on the table. With great difficulty, Jianzu gathered himself. You want to know how I earned that name all those years ago? He whispered, leaning in with a co-conspirator's trust. It's a funny story. First, I made an example out of a few earthbenders among the Yellownecks. I took my time with them. Then I told the rest that whoever dug the deepest trench to hide it by sundown would be spared, free to return to their homes. Only the ones who lagged behind would be killed. He chuckled in satisfaction. You should have seen it. They dug as fast as their wretched hands could take them. Some of them killed each other over a shovel. They jumped into their holes and looked up with smug little smiles, thinking they'd be the ones surviving, not their compatriots. Kyoshi wanted to throw up. There was no word for what Jianzu was. And there you have it, he said. 5,000 fresh graves dug up by their own occupants. I simply swept the earth over the top. Like I once explained to a former pupil, strength is bending people to your will, not the elements. He sighed as he shelved the good memory back with its neighbors. You're very hard to bend, Kyoshi, but if you give me no other option, after I kill everyone here, I may have to go home and cut Rangi's throat. Lex's last bullet zipped from the table toward Jianzu's. Lex's last bullet zipped from the table toward Jianzu's temple. It stopped before making contact. Jianzu rocked in his chair from the effort of counteracting her bending, one hand crooked in the air. With great effort, he lowered the stone back to the table, pushing against her the whole way. He was greatly interested in this turn of events. How? He said as they fought over control of the rock. When you left, you lacked the precision to bend a piece of earth this small. Kyoshi's spread fan fluttered under the table, hidden from his sight. The strain was much greater for her. I fell in with a different crowd, she said. Jianzu looked mildly impressed. Well, I hope you're happy with what you've learned, because now you've doomed everyone here. He reached up with his other hand and pulled the roof down. Kyoshi matched him, bringing her second fan above the table. A tremor went through the building and died down before it could register as a problem with the patrons. Perhaps a very heavy wagon had passed by. The slab roof stayed where it was, though a trickle of dust drifted onto a few tables, causing annoyed shouts from the third floor. By now, a few people were looking at them, drawn by their bending poses. Run, she wanted to scream at the gawking bystanders, but she couldn't. Her entire body was tense to the breaking point, her throat frozen. It was taking every ounce of her effort to oppose Jianzu's strength. But as her eyes wandered up to his, she saw what he seemed almost as God damn it. I am not making words go the way I want them to. Hold on. Just give me a second. But as her eyes wandered up to his, she saw what he seemed almost as taxed. His shoulders were trembling like hers. I do need to give your... I do need to give your... He said before cutting himself short. He was likely going to say he needed to give Kyoshi's new friends his compliments, but he couldn't manage talking under the strain. He noticed her noticing his little moment of weakness. With a surge of anger, he pointed his leg to the side and tried to blow out the supporting wall. Kyoshi made a silent scream as the effort to keep it intact tore a muscle within her body along her rib cage. She fought through the pain and managed to keep the destruction down to a single crack running from floor to ceiling. The wall held. Jianzu's jaw flexed. He bared his teeth. He and Kyoshi warred with stillness, their whole beings locked in opposition, a perversion of neutral jing, where they only appeared to be doing nothing. Vibrations began to grow through the building again. The slight rattle of cups against saucers. The patrons on the ground floor nearby might have suspected this girl and this man were to blame, but their hesitance to move kept them within the reach of danger. The sounds of conversation blurred and slowed, as if the air itself had frozen over. Men and women in Kyoshi's peripheral vision turned their heads at a snail's pace. Their sentences drew out like moans. Kyoshi might have been pushing against Jianzu so hard that she no longer knew what was real. She heard a footstep echoing in her ear, and then another. A cloaked figure walked with purpose toward their table. Nor she nor Jianzu could move. It was as if a third presence had joined their struggle. Okay. Hold on. I need to drink water because I read ahead and... Drink! Oh my... Okay. Alright. A cloaked figure walked with purpose toward their table. Nor she nor Jianzu could move. It was as if a third presence had joined their struggle, clasping its hand over their interlocked, bending, squeezing them together. The person who stood over them with all the familiarity... The person who stood over them with all the familiarity in the world threw his hood back. It was Yoon. Had she the ability to breathe, Kyoshi would have choked, sobbed. This was a dream and a nightmare. Oh, I know. I don't know. Oh my god, how to feel. Right now, I thought our boy Yoon was dead like 20 chapters ago. So thought he was dead like 20 chapters ago, maybe not. Oh god. This was a dream and a nightmare. Her highest hopes and cruelest torment poured together in some horrific concoction and flung in her face. How had he survived? How had he found them? Why had he come back now of all times? Jianzu's shock at seeing Yoon nearly broke the volatile hold he had on the stone around them. Kyoshi could no longer tell who was in control of what, with their bending commingled together. Only certain that if she released the tension by moving or speaking or blinking, the whole enterprise would have come tumbling down. The three of them were locked in a private delirium, a prison of their own making. Yoon said nothing. He looked at them with a faint, beatific smile. Beatific? Beatific. Let me look it up. I am so in shock right now. Beatific. Beatific. Yoon said nothing. He looked at them with a faint, beatific smile. His skin had the glow of a healthy adventurer back from a successful trip, neat stubble lining his jaw. His eyes twinkling with the same warm mischief that Kyoshi remembered so well. None of this kept a blinding, nauseating. I cannot fucking read anything for whatever reason. I'm so. Maybe he got taken to the spirit world. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. But yeah, none of this kept a blinding, nauseating sense of wrongness from pouring out of his body. People had always been drawn to Yoon like metal to a lodestone, and to a lodestone. And Kyoshi had been no exception. But he'd change. There was something essential missing from the otherworldly being in front of her. Something human. The boy she'd loved had been replaced by a hollow scaffolding, wind blowing through its gaps. The nearby customers who'd so far tolerated her strangeness recoiled away from Yoon like he was a rotting corpse, scraping chairs over the floor with their haste to create distance. They couldn't bear to be near him. Yoon noticed the bullet on the table. Its presence filled him with delight, and his face lit up, as he'd seen the object before. He reached over and slowly plucked the stone free while Kyoshi and Jianzu were still fighting for control over it, tearing the rock from the combined bending grip of a great master and the Earth Avatar. To Kyoshi, it felt like he'd ripped a hole in the empty space, removed the moon from the sky itself. She could almost hear a sucking noise as the bullet left her in Jianzu's grasp. Still, without words, Yoon held the rock out, making sure Kyoshi and Jianzu could both see it. Then he cupped that hand to Jianzu's chest. Jianzu's eyes bulged. Kyoshi felt his earthbending flare outward and was forced to compensate. Yoon gently put his other hand back, still stained with black ink. To Jianzu's back. After another second passed, he showed them what had traveled between his palms. The stone, now covered in blood. Yoon didn't wait for Jianzu to finish sighing. He winked at Kyoshi and turned to leave. Jianzu teetered at his seat, gagging on blood and a dark red patch spreading from the tunnel in his chest. The waiter screamed. It was everything Kyoshi could do to contain Jianzu's earthbending death throes. More cat. Yeah, it was everything Kyoshi could do to contain Jianzu's earthbending death throes. More cracks raced along the walls, begging loud enough to draw the notice of the patrons. At the door, Yoon paused and looked back at Kyoshi, seeing her duress, how she was barely holding the tea house together. He grinned. and then he bumped the table. The foundations of the building rose and fell at his command. The impact knocked people to the floor. Kyoshi lost her grip on too much of the stone, and the roof began to crumble. Yoon vanished. A sheet of rock the size of a window crashed to the first floor, narrowly missing a waiter. She could feel the makings of a stampede beginning to form. There were too many pieces collapsing around her. The world was falling apart before her eyes. Laogu had insisted, despite her protest, that she didn't need to unlock the secrets of... Jesus. Hold on. Nice. Mute for an hour. Okay. Okay, yes. Laogu had insisted, despite her protest, that she didn't need to unlock the secrets of immortality. He had made her join him in his daily longevity exercises. She told him flat out that she considered the concept bunk. This isn't spiritualism, he said. You don't have to believe, you simply have to practice. He'd taken her to the same spots that a guru would meditate in. The curves of flowing rivers, the stumps of once massive trees, caves bored into the cliffside. But he'd also filled her ear with counterintuitive nonsense. Instead of blocking everything out like how you normally meditate, take it all in, he said while they rested in the meadow on their way to Taihua. Notice each blade of grass in the same moment you notice a single one. I would have to have 1,000 eyes to do that, she snapped. He shrugged. Or an infinite amount of time. Either would work. The riddles never ceased while they prepared for Tez's assassination. Divide your body into two, he said, while he practiced heating and breaking a piece of scrap metal. Then divide it again, and then again, and again. What would you have left? A bloody mess. She burned her hands and yelped. Exactly, Laogu said. Put the pieces back, and put them back again and again and again, one more time, and you're whole once again. A human being isn't a block of stone, she said, throwing him her reddened thumb for emphasis. That's where you're wrong. The illusion that the self is separate from the rest of the world is the driving factor that limits our potential. Once you realize that nothing's special about the self, it becomes easier to manipulate. To Kyoshi, that had been the easiest lesson to learn. She was nothing special. She had never been anything special. That was a mantra she believed in. Her eyes glowed, but only in a brief pulse. She didn't need to express her mastery over multiple elements like she had during her duel with Zhu. Just one. The stone was her, and she was the stone. Her mind was everywhere, dancing along the tips of her fingers. She had let go of her fans, but for now, it didn't matter. Kyoshi felt the shape of each piece and how it fit into the next, making it so easy to put them back together. She wouldn't have been able to say whether she meant she wouldn't have been able to say whether she meant the tea house or her own being. According to Lagu, there was no difference. There was a stumble of there was a stubble. Yeah, there was a stumble of destruction, almost like ants crawling over her arm. The customers on each floor scrambled for the exits. She watched them run. She watched them run along shattered tiles held up by nothing but her earthbending. Each step the panicked crowd took was its own distinct little thump. Under another weight to catalog. It was no great trouble to her. When the last of the occupants fled, Kyoshi got up, maintaining the form of crowding bridge. When the last of the occupants had fled, Kyoshi got up, maintaining the form of crowding bridge with one raised hand, while she stuck her fans into her belt with the other. She looked at Jianzu, slumped over, her revenge encompassed within a single body. It seemed so bounded and infinite. How could such a container have held the volume of her anguish, her wrath? If any feeling at all pressed through the numbness of her unity with the earth around her, it was the ire of a hoodwinked child who'd been promised the end of her bedtime story, only to see the candle light snuffed and the door slammed shut. She was a girl alone in the dark. She decided to leave Jianzu where he was, not out of any remaining spite. The path that led her to him had simply ended. She exited into the square. There was a half ring of people around her, giving plenty of berth, staring in horror. They didn't care who she was or how she'd saved their lives. She didn't care. Kyoshi let go of her focus, and the building groaned behind her. The crowd shrieked as the tea house collapsed, sending a wave of dust over their heads. The civilian residents of Qinshao began to flee. At the same time, she heard the clash of gongs and saw lawmen shoving their way through the masses. The officers drew their swords as they closed in. "Don't move!" the captain shouted. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground." She looked at the red-faced, nervous men clinging to their steel. Without saying anything, she dust-stepped higher and higher, ignoring their threats and shouts of astonishment, until she flew over their heads, onto the nearest rooftop, and into the sky. There was a single tree on the crossroads leading into Qinshao. It was a single dominant limb that extended sideways, with a length of rusted, forgotten chain that looped around the branch. Kyoshi wondered what was hung from the end of the chain before it snapped. Peng Peng rolled in the grass after the flying opera company sat in a circle, back from the mission Kyoshi had sent them on. A short-haired figure leaped to her feet and ran over. Rangi buried her face in Kyoshi's chest. She shuddered and wept, but she was otherwise unharmed. Kyoshi cheated on the test Jianzu had put to her. He hadn't counted on a mere servant girl having such steadfast allies, so well versed to breaking in and to breaking. He hadn't counted on a mere servant girl having such steadfast allies, so well versed in breaking and entering. While Kyoshi faced Jianzu and Qinshao, the rest of the flying opera company raided his manor in Yokuya, using the detailed plans she'd given them to rescue Rangi. But there was one extra body laying in the shade of the tree. She recognized Heiran, wrapped in blankets. The older woman had a ghastly pallor to her face that was hard to look at. with their family resemblance. Kyoshi couldn't think of anything but Rangi in a similar state of helplessness. Kyoshi, my mother, Rangi whispered, trembling in her grasp. I found her in the infirmary like this. I don't know what happened to her. I abandoned my mother. I left her and this happened. She'll be all right, Kyoshi said, trying to pass conviction from her body to Rangi's. I swear she'll be all right. We'll do whatever it takes to fix her. She let Rangi recover in her embrace, her sobs slowing down until they became a second heartbeat. Kyoshi stroked the crop of fuzz. Kyoshi stroked the crop of fuzz left behind by the severed top knot. The firebender flinched as if she'd grazed an open wound. I should be wearing a sack over my head so you can't see me like this, she said. There wasn't a good way to explain that Kyoshi didn't care one bit about her hair or her honor, as long as she was alive. In fact, it was easier for Kyoshi to rest her cheek on Rangi's head now, without all the sharp pins in the way. After giving the two of them time, Karima, Wong, and Lao Gu came over. The operation succeeded, obviously, Karima said. Once you've rescued one person from the bowels of a powerful Earth Kingdom official's personal dungeon, you've rescued them all. You were right. Jianji didn't seem to expect that you'd have us on your side. It made things a bit easier. I may have helped myself to some valuables on the way out, Wong said. His thick fingers were covered in new gold rings and jade seals, including one that allowed him direct private correspondence with the Earth King. Kyoshi saw no issue with that, but his knuckles were busted open and bloody. Was there a struggle? She asked. No one's dead, Wong said quickly, but I had to get information the old-fashioned way from some mercenaries dressed in guards' clothing. I may have gone a little overboard. I don't regret it. He looked at Rangi in Kyoshi's arms and gave a rare smile. The gravedigger took one of ours. I wasn't going to let him take another. Speaking of which, where is he? Karima said. Is it over? Jianzi was dead, but Yoon was alive. An uncontrollable strike of lightning. Kyoshi had no idea what had felled Rangi's mother, nor what would happen to Yokia in the future without its guiding sage. And despite her best attempts to sully the position, her dedication to committing every possible outrage and act of disqualification, she was still the Avatar. Was it over? Kyoshi found she had no answer to that question at all. Hold on. Yeah. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh my god, now we get to go to the last chapter. I'm excited. It's not an epilogue. It doesn't say epilogue, it's just another chapter. Or is that what it's called? The last chapter is called an epilogue? I always thought it was like, after a series is done, it's like a follow-up. Hold on. No, it says... Well, no, because the book's not over yet. I mean, the series isn't over yet. It says epilogue, a section or speech at the end of a book or play that serves as a comment on or a conclusion to what has happened, or a final or concluding act or event. An epilogue? Oh, okay. Or what? An epilogue is a concluding piece of the story. I mean, I guess. I guess you're right, in a way. Whatever. Okay. But yes, on to the next. Man, I hope Yoon is not gonna be the fucking villain in the next fucking book. I'd be really bummed out. I hope that's not the case. I feel like it might be the case. Okay. Alright. The last chapter of this book is called Hauntings. Hauntings. The Southern Air Temple was unlike any place Kyoshi had ever seen. White towers extended past the tops of swirling strands of mist. Long paths wound like meditation mazes up the slopes to the earthbound entrances. Bison calves frolicked in the air, adorable, grunting little clouds of fur and horn. She didn't understand how people could wish to be nomads when they had a home so full of beauty and peace. Kyoshi waited in a garden distinguished by its simplicity and open spaces rather than destiny and expensive details, like the mansions she was accustomed to. The breeze. Hold on. Excuse me. The breeze, unhindered by the grass and raked sand, was a crisp bite against her skin. The garden abutted a temple wall with large wooden doors. Each entrance was covered by metal tubing that spiraled into knots. Sorry. I don't know what is wrong with me today. Each entrance was covered by metal tubing. That spiraled into knots and terminated in a wide open end that resembled a stungi horn. She was alone. Her friends had gone their separate ways. Karima and Wong wanted to have a break from smuggling and lie low for a while, living off the injection of loot they'd pilfered from Jianzu's mansion. They promised to keep in touch and show their faces once Kyoshi had established herself. They were the Avatar's companions, after all. No doubt she could pardon them for whatever trouble they got up to. Laogu declined to go with them, claiming he needed to rest his weary bones. In private, he told Kyoshi that as the Avatar and an important world leader, she was now on his watch list. He was only half joking, but she didn't mind. She was pretty sure she could take the old man in a fight to the death now. Heiran had woken up. Rangi, fighting through each word, told Kyoshi that she needed to take her mother to the North Pole, where the best healers in the world lived. And If there was any chance for her to fully recover, it would be found among the experts of the Water Tribe. That meant saying goodbye. That meant saying goodbye for who knew how long. They could and would find each other again in the future, but as Gu had foreboded, they wouldn't be the same people when it happened. As much as Kyoshi wanted to stay with her, in a single frozen pool of moments, the current carrying them forward was too strong. Kyoshi had waited until her friends left before making her move, wanting to spare them of the chaos that would ensue after her unveiling. The air nomads often accepted pilgrims from other nations, letting them stay at the monasteries and nunneries on a temporary basis. With Jianzu no longer darkening her life, she simply joined a group of ragged travelers hiking up the mountain to the southern air temple. During the orientation of her fellow lay people, she'd introduced herself by asking everyone to stand back. In front of the monks, she'd summoned a tornado of fire and air. The blazing dual-element vortex proved her identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. Through the fact that she'd nearly burned down a sacred tree reminded her, though the fact that she'd nearly burned down a sacred tree reminded her it was still a good idea to rely on her fans for a bit longer. But, as she'd expected, there was a commotion. Many of the senior abbots had known Jianzu and met Yoon. Her existence caused an overturning of the agreed-upon order. She was not the vaunted prodigy of the Earth Kingdom. The boy who'd publicly been credited with destroying the menace. She was not the vaunted prodigy of the Earth Kingdom. The boy who'd publicly been credited with destroying the menace of the Fifth Nation pirates. But there was a reason why she'd gone to the Airbenders instead of a sage from her homeland. The isolation and sanctity of the temple provided a measure of protection as the storm of her arrival howled outside of its walls. Though she was a native airbender, the air nomads took her outrageous account of the events as simple truth, told by the Avatar. They bore the anger and blustering of Earth sages, who saw her as illegitimate, like she'd somehow usurped. There we go. I was about to say usurped. They bore the anger and blustering. They bore the anger and blustering of Earth sages who saw her as illegitimate, like she somehow usurped her position by being born, and relayed messages to her with calmness and grace. The Council of Elders at the Southern Air Temple were not interested in profiting from her presence, nor in dictating what she should do next. They seemed content to listen to her and fulfill what requests they could. Plus, Peng Peng enjoyed being back with a herd. Kyoshi owed the girl some time off with her own kind. "Avatar Kyoshi!" someone shouted, breaking her reverie. She looked up. High above her on a balcony, a tall young monk waved. She stepped back to give him space to land, and he vaulted over the railing. A gust of wind slowed his descent, billowing his orange and yellow robes. Yeah, it kind of does seem like just Earth sages are just not good. Not good at all. Anyways. High above her on the balcony, a tall young monk waved. She stepped back to give him space to land, and he vaulted over the railing. A gust of wind slowed his descent. Maybe no. No, no. Nah. He was not right. Don't you say that. That's a horrible thing to say. Okay. She stepped back to give him space to land, and he vaulted over the railing. A gust of wind slowed his descent, billowing his orange and yellow robes. He touched down beside her as lightly as Cream had in Madame Kiji's long ago. Hold on. I don't want you guys to hear this. It's gonna be loud. There we go, I am back. Apologies, Avatar, monk Jinpa said. The tower stairs take forever. I used my fair share of architectural shortcuts. Yeah, I've used my fair share of architectural shortcuts, Kyoshi said. She and Jinpa began to walk around the garden as they talked. What's the latest? Monk Jinpa has been assigned to her as a chamberlain of sorts. He was the leader of the temple's administrative group, handling logistics and finance when the air nomads were forced to deal with the material world. Even monks needed someone to look after what little money ended up in their possession. The latest is, well, still a mess, Jinpa said. The tragedy at Yokia is worse than we feared. 200 on the Earth Kingdom's elite murdered by poison, and some of the household as well. Kyoshi closed her eyes against the deep ache. She'd only found out by proxy what had happened at the mansion. Are there more details? The investigators sent by the Earth King believed that it was an act of revenge by a Daofei group. Somehow they'd found out about an important gathering of sages and decided to strike with a level of brazenness that has never been seen before. Ranky's mother had fallen by the same means, and Kyoshi didn't know who among her former co-workers was still alive. She didn't know if Auntie Mui was alive. She had to go back to Yokia as soon as possible. Yeah, she had to go back to Yokia as soon as possible. What have you heard from Jin Chao? She asked. Jinpa scrunched his face. The poor monk was taxed by having so much bad news pass through his ears. As a pacifist, he wasn't used to this level of death and mayhem. The officers found Master Jianzu's body. A couple of witnesses have corroborated your story, that a young man killed him in cold blood. But many of the townsfolk aren't convinced of your innocence. Nearly all of them maintain that you destroyed the tea house. Kyoshi hadn't told anyone that it was Yoon who'd avenged his own death. Looking back, she was barely certain of it herself. The encounter had been as surreal as the one in the mining town where she thought he perished. In both cases, she'd seen an entity she had no hope of understanding. That's all right, she said. I doubt I'll be bothering the Chins anytime soon. Is that the last of the news? Ah, no. Master Jianzu's death came with a complication. Although it would have been entirely inappropriate, she nearly burst out laughing. Sure. What was another complication added to the pile? It seems that several close associates, including the Earth King and the King of Omashu, held copies of a sealed last will and testament to be opened on the event of his death. It named the Avatar as the inheritor of his entire estate. It named the Avatar as the inheritor of his entire estate. Kyoshi brushed the revelation off. He was training Yoon to be his successor in protecting the Earth Kingdom. It makes sense. The monk shook his head. The will refers to you by name, Avatar Kyoshi. Master Jianzu sent the copies by messenger hawks only a few weeks ago, and the documents he confesses to his great mistake in wrongly identifying the Avatar and beseeches his colleagues to give you their full support, as he posthumously does. His lands, his riches, his house, they're yours now. They're yours now. Kyoshi had to stop and marvel at how Jianzu persisted in his methods from beyond the grave. It was so like him to assume the privilege of a sudden course of reversal, to think correcting a mistake was the same thing as making amends. In his will, Jianzu expected that, at his behest, the world would see events the way he did. Let me guess, Kyoshi said. Well, those documents completely settled the matter of whether or not I'm the Avatar. Now people will think I murdered him to inherit his wealth. Junpei could only raise his arms in helplessness. It is unusual that he was with you in Qinchao instead of his home so soon after the poisoning. The other members of the Flying Opera Company would have found it funny. At least getting bequeathed the mansion didn't violate. Yeah, at least getting bequeathed the mansion didn't violate the Daofei oaths she'd taken. She had every intention of keeping the same code as her sworn family members, living and dead. She went silent as they resumed their walk. She went silent as they resumed their walk. It was said that each avatar was born in fitting times, to an era that needed them. Judging by its start, the era of Kyoshi would be marred by uncertainty, fear, and death, the only gift she seemed capable of producing for the world. The people would never revere her like they did Yang Chen, or smile at her like they did Karuk. Then let it be so, she thought. She would fight her ill fortune, her bad stars, and protect those who might despise her to the very end of her days. They reached her quarters. Kyoshi had told the monk she'd be perfectly fine sleeping in the same plain cells as the rest of the pilgrims, but they'd insisted on giving her the room reserved for the Avatar's current incarnation. It was more of a vast hall by her standards. That's cool. So she's probably sleeping in Aang's future room once he's reincarnated. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Kyoshi had told the monk she'd be perfectly fine sleeping in the same plain cells as the rest of the pilgrims, but they'd insisted on giving her the room reserved for the Avatar's current incarnation. Wait, maybe I just read that wrong. Or maybe not. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, but they'd insisted on giving her the room reserved for the Avatar's current incarnation. It was more of a vast hall by her standards. Orange columns held the ceiling up, giving it the impression of an indoor grove, and the dark wooden floor was carpeted with fine bison wool, naturally shed and woven into patterns of the air nomad worlds. There were stations for meditative exercises, including a reflective pool, and a blank stone surface, surrounded by vials of colored sand. Is there anything else you need right now, Avatar Kyoshi? Junpei asked. As a matter of fact, there was. I noticed Master Kelsang's name in various registers around the temple, she said, but in a lower place of honor than his experience would suggest. Ah, apologies, Avatar, but that's an issue of air nomad practices. You see, it's customary to maintain a level of separation between those who've taken life, directly or indirectly, and those who have remained spiritually pure. It applies to names and records as well. It applies to names and records as well. So it was a matter of Kelsang being unclean. That was how the air nomads had interpreted his efforts to save coastal villagers from the depredations of pirates. She wondered where her mother's name would be in the Eastern Air Temple, perhaps buried in the ground with the refuse. She looked at Junpei's round, innocent expression. Her exploits at Zigon hadn't reached here yet. She thought about how fully in control she'd been. She thought about how fully in control she'd been when she let Zhu fall. I'd like Master Kelsang's name restored to its regular esteemed status, Kyoshi said. The casual imperiousness came so easy to her. She hated every inch it pushed her toward behaving like Jianzhu, but there was such an effective tool in her arsenal, enhanced by her dreadful reputation. The Council of Elders won't be pleased, Junpei said, hoping that she'd back down. But I would be, Kyoshi replied. In fact, a statue would be nice. He was young and savvy enough to understand the level she was operating at. He chuckled in resignation. As you wish, Avatar Kyoshi. If you have further requests, let me know. It's the least my compatriots and I can do after failing to come to your assistance for so long. We were unfortunately in the dark, along with the rest of the world. Kyoshi tilted her head. The air nomads weren't to blame for my troubles. I'm referring to a different we. Junpei scratched the back of his neck. Do you play Paisho by any chance? Kyoshi frowned at his cryptic statement in sudden tangent. Let me say that again. Kyoshi frowned at his cryptic statement and sudden tangent. I do not, she said. I have no taste for the game. Junpei took her declaration as the signal to leave. He bowed and left her to her solitude. Kyoshi sighed deeply and walked over to the reflective pool, where a cushion lay at the head. She sat down in the pose Lao Gu had taught her and closed her eyes halfway. Her lashes forming a curtain over her view. She'd spent much of her time at the air temple meditating in this spot. It seemed wrong to call it her favorite place. The only one where she could be at relative peace was more apt. No one had warned her how empty it would feel to have a singular goal and see it achieved. Yoon's reappearance, his assistance, his new and utter contempt for innocent life, gnawed at her edges and kept her from sleeping. It was cooler by the edge of the It was cooler by the edge of the pool than the rest of the room. She knew it was from the evaporation, But today there was a downright chill. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, and she shivered. Kyoshi, she heard a man say. Her eyes flew open, where she shouldn't have seen where she shouldn't have seen her reflection in where she should have seen her reflection in the water. She saw a changing outline, still of a person, but rippling between dozens of shapes, as if she dashed the surface of the pool. Kyoshi, she heard the voice say again. A gust of wind sent her hair flying. A shroud of mist rose from the pool. She blinked, and there was a man sitting on top of the water, facing her, mirroring her pose. He was in his 30s. Yep, basically. Basically. Oh boy. he was in a he was in his 30s and ruggedly handsome. He wore the regalia of a great water tribe chieftain, his dark blue furs offsetting the paleness of his eyes. His body was adorned with the trophies of a mighty hunter, the sharp teeth of beasts laid around his neck and wrists. Kyoshi, I need your help, he pleaded. She stared at the spirit of a man whom she knew was dead. The man who'd been Jianzu and Heiran and Kelsing's friend. The man who'd been her predecessor in the Avatar cycle. Karuk? And that is the end of the book. She makes contact with Karuk. And he's like, I need your help. Man, I don't know what to expect. I feel like Yoon is gonna be a bad guy in the next fucking book, and I'm just like, I hope that's not the case. What if he's actually still dead, but it's like a spirit taking over? What if it's that spirit that's taken over his body or something? I don't know. That'd be kind of gnarly. But then, why would he come and kill Jianzu if... I don't know. But yeah, that's the end of the book. Yeah, it took her the whole book to make contact with the... Well, she had contact at first. Sort of. Yeah, there was an end of a chapter where Karuk had made contact with her, but she didn't know it was him. I'm trying to find it now. Yep. Alright. Well, I will end this recording. Thank you so much for listening. that was, I don't know what was up with me today. It was just, I don't know. But yeah, I ended when I wanted to end. I thought I was going to end at like 11, but I didn't. So I'm happy for that. Okay, well, I will get, oh yeah, you can, yeah, that's 11 right now. Okay, well, I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.